Welcome to the Rimworld mod rundown. We'll be taking a quick look at what you can expect to see from Vanilla Quests Expanded Ancients. For starters, you'll need the Biotech DLC, as well as the additional workshop content, Vanilla Expanded Framework, and Harmony. Back with coverage for another quest mod. Ancients is likely to be far more familiar to those of you that have been playing modded Rimworld for a while now, as it's adapting the previous Factions release of the Ancients mod with a more practical implementation. A lot of the stuff here is brand new, but there might be the odd piece that looks similar or has the same function as the original version. This makes far greater use of mechanics that have been introduced with official DLC, namely the Archite Genes system. Personally speaking, whilst I have made a lot of use of the genetics system in Biotech, I rarely bothered with harvesting or implanting Archite Genes because farming for capsules was a royal pain in the arse, and it just made it easier and more reliable to use standard xenogerms instead. Fortunately, Ancients is giving you a lot more options to build with, as well as far easier access to the rare materials needed to make all of it work. Let's get started, shall we? Kicking off with the quest chain itself. For now, we're not going to panic about any of the various new parts that are being shown on screen, and instead we're going to focus on what you need to accomplish to actually access any of this new stuff. You'll get the first stage of this quest line somewhere between 90 and 120 days after having started your colony. This is one of those quests that will appear without a timer, so whilst you will want to accept it to generate the site on your world map, you aren't going to be ticking down a clock after hitting that accept button, meaning you're free to take it as soon as it appears, but deal with it in your own time. Like previous quest mods, the sites for Ancients aren't restrained by the same logic as a standard quest, so they're not going to appear right on your doorstep and are far more likely to require either a large caravan, a shuttle, or even a grav ship expedition to reach, with the grav ship being especially useful as it isn't burdened with weight limits like a shuttle or lengthy travel times like a caravan. The first quest will take you to an ancient, abandoned super soldier lab. The lab itself isn't necessarily dangerous, but that doesn't mean it's entirely safe either, so don't go barging through it without a care in the world, as it might get someone turned into a thin red smear on the walls and floor. You also don't want to leave exploring a location like this to just one or two colonists. The more people you bring, the faster you can perform a clean sweep of the area and loot it for all of this cool stuff. It's a hell of a lot of hauling work for only a few hands. The site itself will be sealed with an ancient large vault door that's going to require overriding. Fortunately, it's a much faster process than the standard hacking, so you won't be twiddling your thumbs waiting for a colonist to let everybody else inside. Locked ancient doors and ancient walls are also indestructible, so you won't be able to break your way into these sites either. Once the door has been overridden, however, it's now capable of being breached with an attack, to prevent you from sealing yourself in an impenetrable vault and ignoring raids presumably. The main threats in this abandoned lab will be sealed within containment pods, such as Splicelings. These will burst open and attack your colonists if you get too close to them, or if you accidentally rush into a room that contains one right by the doorway. It's why you want to scour these areas with a full squad first, before allowing members to go off individually to secure any loot and then store it for transport. What we're actually here for though is in the lower levels of this vault, so you're first going to need to locate the huge sealed door and override that too, before going down to explore that floor and locate and activate the ancient broadcasting system. That's all you need to do to complete this quest. Of course, there is far more that you could do at this site, but we'll get to that later. For now, just know that if you want to move things between floors, such as bringing up furniture from the basement level to the main vault, you can use the exit vault button on the vault ramp. This opens a menu that allows you to load parts into the structure, with them appearing on its counterparts on the higher or lower floor, depending on how you're moving things around. Once this quest has been completed, or if you've hung around the site for a significant amount of time, your caravan will be detected and raids will start appearing in a few days. That's why more hands are better for a location like this. There's a lot of really expensive and extremely useful loot that you're likely going to want to take with you. Having only one or two colonists scrambling around trying to get everything done in a couple of days will likely mean that you need to leave some of those riches behind, or risk a raid that could be stronger than you initially expected. due to the wealth value of the location that you are currently robbing blind. That's the first quest down anyway, on to the second part. This will be offered to you in a few in-game hours after completing step 1. The difficulty in this one ramps up a fair bit too, so if you did find that you were getting battered by the very limited dangers that were present at the first site, make sure you're locking and loading before heading out to this one. The horrors that you previously encountered are now roaming the hallway as well as hiding in containment pods, waiting to spring out when you open the wrong door. It's essentially the same quest that you have just done, only this time there are more risks at the site, so you know what to do. Bust open that door, force your way down into the lower level, find the broadcasting station and override it again. The lower level also has a far higher density of enemies too, so don't send your colonists down one by one, because you can't be sure that the room you're descending into is clear, and the last thing you want to do is basically feed colonists in a conga line to these monsters. The enemies also seem to have somewhat supernatural perception. If you aggro one of them, even if you didn't fire a shot or make any noise in doing so, you will be summoning the horde. Some may potentially be blocked by indestructible locked doors, but any that can make it to your location will. Alright, second broadcasting station hacked, another location looted, what's next? Another super soldier lab. Who'd have predicted that? The threat at this one is a bit different though, as this time it's going to be infested by bugs. Depending on how your team was outfitted, this could be easier, but it's equally as likely to be harder to deal with because the number of insectoids is far greater. So even though they go down much easier, nice, you're at a greater risk of being overwhelmed. Annoyingly too, these insects are absolute dickheads. Because the rooms that they're likely to have spawned in are totally sealed, with indestructible walls and doors, they're especially prone to just break every single piece of furniture in their surroundings. There are still sealed containment pods in this vault too, and if you can wake the monsters up at the right time, they will start a fight with the insectoids if they're closer. It's not exactly a super viable or secret strategy, it's just useful to know, and it might buy you a little bit of time to fall back to a better position and tend a wound or two, or maybe slow a bit of bleeding. The basement is where things can get really dangerous here though. The density of insects is horrific, and just like those extremely perceptive horrors before, bugs also know when you start beating up their friends, so you can fully expect to be hit with a swarm down here from every available angle, especially when you unseal the next door and open up the new potential wave of enemies. This is also a site that you're more incentivized to fully explore, adding to the danger, as there's a higher density of unique parts and structures that you can bring home with you. So as grim as facing all the bugs and potentially more splice monstrosities are, you'll need to do it to gather all the goodies and find the splice frame uplink. The quest will be completed when you uninstall this structure, and don't forget to take it with you. You'll need to wait a few in-game hours after beating the infested lab before the next quest appears, and when it does, you'll be sent on a reconnaissance mission to another vault. You're never going to guess what's at this vault either. Ha! Wrong. This place is full of ancient super soldiers that have had enough and taken over the lab. I mean, the place is still pretty familiar in terms of structures, layouts and the goal, but at least you get to fight something a little bit different now. These super soldiers can come in with all kinds of potential risks too, so it's best to check their xenotype screen before you go charging into combat, because you don't want to find out the hard way that they deal 300% melee damage and punch your frontliner's head clean off with a single swing. The lower floor is going to be more of the same, but you might be noticing with these layouts that they are generating larger and larger vaults. That means more time clearing rooms, more time hauling parts, and obviously many more threats to deal with. Whilst human targets are often easier to take down with a concentrated salvo of bullets, you're always rolling the dice with these super soldiers, so take your time in this place. It can be extremely unpredictable. What you're looking for at this site is the mutagen inhibitor core, another part of your own super soldier machine that you're going to need to uninstall to complete the quest. A quick note here too. In the previous factions version of Ancients, parts were extremely useful as they deconstructed into an absolute boatload of normal and advanced components, as well as steel, plasteel and things like that. If you deconstruct parts for these super soldier machines, you're going to get absolutely nothing of value in return anymore. So don't go out of your way to absolutely flatten the labs for all the materials, because the majority of parts turn into metal scrap or nothing. We'll get into what's actually valuable a little bit later on. From now on, you're also going to be offered the repeatable quest of securing a seized vault. This likely popped up while you were working on this reconnaissance mission, as starting that quest is the trigger that allows this one to fire. The seized vault may be repeated once a year, with it granting you an opportunity to find more capsules, any missing structures that you don't have, and of course, loot the place. You'll already be familiar with what you're going to be facing here: spliced monsters and super soldiers. Admittedly, the basement is significantly more populated than previous sites, so it is upping the risk, which is understandable given the amount of stuff that's on offer here. Places like this can make for an excellent stopover if you're doing a gravship centric run, even if you aren't actually taking the super soldier stuff on board with you, purely because they offer a solid amount of medicine, meals, body parts, and condensed structures that make a really good use of a small footprint. It's up to you when to call this quest complete, as there's no hard win condition necessarily, like needing to hack a broadcast station or uninstall a particular piece of equipment. The quest is considered complete once you've hacked the door open, but you're free to take as much or as little as you would like and just leave. About a year or so later, you'll be offered this quest again, and you can go to another vault, just like this one, and do it all over. So failing one of these quests isn't the end of the world. The final quest of the chain will be offered a day or so after finishing that reconnaissance mission, so you're always going to have that previous repeatable quest to revisit vaults, even when you've done with the main quest chain. However, if you fail the final quest, it will simply end it without giving you the opportunity to try again for the last unique piece of equipment that's on offer. That means you need to lock in for this final mission. You've only got one shot at it. The upper floor here is very familiar. Some spliced monsters wandering around the corridors with containment jump scares waiting behind closed doors. As we've come to expect, it's the lower level of the vault that really matters here. This is the biggest facility of all. You'll be spending a solid chunk of time exploring and uncovering monsters here. This is going to have the highest concentration of active and contained splicers, as well as stored Archite capsules, gene packs, and parts to take home with you. If you manage to make it to the pathing array and uninstall it, you've completed the main questline of Ancients and should now have access to a full complement of lab equipment. Shall we cover what a complete setup actually includes and what each part does? The foundation of this setup is going to be the Archogen Injector. This is the centerpiece that everything else is going to connect to. Currently, it uses one Archite capsule to attempt to implant one random Archite gene and one random negative trait that typically lands with a metabolism offset of +3. The process is going to take 5 days to perform, and it will put the patient into a coma for 7 days once completed, regardless of whether it succeeds or not. Now, some of this lab equipment is extremely straightforward in what it does, but other parts offer a benefit at the cost of also applying another negative. So it's up to you if you want to have a complete lab for every single injection, or if you'd like to keep certain parts disabled at times to try and fine-tune the outcome in your favour. Ultimately, a lot of this stuff is going to come down to rolling the dice anyway. These injectors can have a positive outcome, they can have a failed outcome, or they can have a catastrophic outcome that turns your subject into a splicer. The first addition we can get our hands on are neurostabilizer arrays, with an injector supporting up to 10 of these. Parts for these injectors can also connect to multiple at once, meaning you only need 10 neurostabilizer arrays for a lab that was running, say, 5 injectors. You just need to make sure they're arranged in a way that everything still connects. Each one of these that's been connected increases the success chance of administering an injection. By how much? Well, the workshop says +1, but without another part connected, you won't actually be able to see this effect taking place just yet. So we're going to hop ahead in the list slightly and install our splice frame uplink to see these percentages. That's the part that we grabbed from the infested super soldier lab. Now, this splice frame uplink isn't all positive. Whilst you can see the percentages that you're playing with, Installing it increases the chance of a horrific failure, raising Spliceling chance by 3%, Splice Hulk chance by 2%, and Splice Fiend chance by 1%. Now that's not strictly working one-to-one either, because you're getting positive offsets from the neurostabilizers. So an injector with just the uplink has a success chance of 46%, rejection chance of 34%, and critical failure combines to about 20%. The injector with 10 arrays and the splice frame has 51% success, 31% rejection, and around 18% for a failure. Knowing these percentages, you can work backwards as to roughly what the positive outcome should be when you uninstall it. This is something you want to plug in to check how your setup is doing in terms of its expected outcome, but remove it before attempting the injection to reduce the chance of a mutation occurring. The next addition here is the Cognitive Recovery Array, with up to 6 connecting to each injector. This is a much clearer metric to work with. Every array installed reduces the injection coma duration by 1 day, so at full capacity you only have to wait 1 day after an injection for the subject to recover. Next we've got the Rapid Infusion Pumps, not to be confused with attempting to get someone pregnant. 9 of these can be connected, with each one lowering the injection time by about 12 hours. So with all of these installed, it's now down to just a single day per injection. Alongside the recovery arrays, that's only 2 days for a full cycle of Archite injections. Given that you can also run multiple injectors connected to these structures, it really doesn't take a long time to throw a lot of fancy genes on all of your colonists and have ridiculous kinds of nonsense to play with. Next is a single structure to connect, the Archite Recycler. This removes the capsule destruction on a rejected outcome, meaning that your Archite stockpile isn't going to be very slowly depleted by negative outcomes. Of course, it'd be nice if things always went well, but that ain't life. At least you don't need to keep looking for traders or digging in vaults once you've got this installed. The next part is the Genomic Attenuator. Now we're getting slightly bigger in the footprint of these parts too, with up to 4 of these connected per injector, and they take 2x2 tiles of space each. Every attenuator you install will lower the impact on metabolism by 1, which translates to receiving a less punishing negative gene as the side effect of gaining your Archite gene. With all 4 installed, you actually get a minor positive instead. Just be aware that with it only installing positive genes, you will be impacting the colonist's hunger rate negatively, so you will be burning through more food by doing this. If you only install 3 of these, you're far more likely to get things like cosmetic genes that add very little impact to gameplay, whilst keeping the colonist's hunger rate better balanced. Just be aware that there are certain genes that are interestingly costed at times, especially if you're running a lot of additional modded races. Now we've got the last part that you're going to need multiple of, the Rejection Buffer Coil. Each one of these will reduce the risk of rejection by 5, but it isn't dumping all of that outcome gain into your success chance, it's spreading it across all of the potential outcomes, meaning with a full setup of what we've covered so far, our success rate is about 65%. Rejection is around 11%, and mutation chance is 23-ish% combined. So from using 10 arrays, we've lowered that rejection chance by 20%, but 14% of that has gone to positive outcome, with the remaining 6% going towards mutation. I'd rather have a colonist land on a success or a rejection rather than any of the mutations. So currently, my best odds for that are by not actually using these buffer coils. However, with the next part, it all makes sense. The Mutagen Inhibitor Core. This is what you picked up from the reconnaissance mission. This drops the risk of mutation entirely, even if you've got the splice frame connected. So you can see, based on what you have access to in your lab, at times it might be better to keep certain parts held back, whereas others are going to free you up to ignore those downsides. This inhibitor does increase rejection chance quite dramatically. It's the equivalent of turning up to a first date in a Cybertruck. But with everything else that's in our setup so far, it still leaves us looking at about a 62% success rate, with rejection no longer burning an Archite capsule and 0 chance of turning into a spliced monster. it's well worth it. You're not going to lose any more colonists. The next two components are similar in their effect, but the impact is the different side of the same coin. You can only install one of each, and they do work in tandem. The trait selection prism allows you to choose between two potential Archite genes when an injection is successful, whereas the aberration redirector allows you to pick between two potential side effect genes. Paired up with your genetic attenuators, that means you get to pick which two positives you would like, and it makes it exceptionally fast to get a specialized colonist. What we haven't talked about up until now is the impact on success chance caused by complexity, because quite simply that's throwing far too much additional math into the mix when we're trying to establish somewhat of a baseline. All you need to know is that repeated injections will lower success chance, as the colonist phenotype becomes more difficult to navigate for new Archite genes. With a complexity harmonizer installed, you'll be able to mitigate this reduction, making it far easier to stack a bonkers amount of Archite genes on a single target. However, you pay for this with increased injection time. For every one complexity already on the subject, it's going to take an additional hour to complete the procedure. Finally, there's the part that we grabbed from the very last quest in that chain, the Archite Pathing Array. The bonus for this structure is a 25% chance to gain an additional, totally random Archite gene upon a successful injection. However, the downside is that you have a 50% chance to gain a second, totally random side effect gene on success too. So let's do some housekeeping points around this effect. It does take into consideration your attenuators, meaning that the random side effect gene can be positive if you have 4 of them installed. Both chances can proc together, leading to 4 genes being gained from a single injection. And whilst you have the choice of your primary Archite gene and side effect, thanks to the prism and the redirector, you have no control over the additional gene that gets rolled. This thing pushes up complexity fast. So if you're trying to handcraft a very specific colonist, this is going to make it take significantly longer as all of those extra genes rapidly stack up. On the other hand, if you just want all kinds of crazy freaks running around your colony with ridiculous bonuses, this is the fastest way of attaining them. So, given that we now know everything about injecting genes into our colonists, should we actually have a look at what we've got to play with? Prowess is for your melee gods, increasing their hit chance and their dodge chance by 300%. Normally this is where I would advise to make sure you're using something like Unlimited Reborn to avoid the stats being totally squashed by the post-processing curve. But that's not the case with Ancients, because the positioning of these offsets in the stat calculation is genius. These 300% increases land after post-processing, so if you have a melee skill of 20 with full Architect limbs, you'd still normally be squashed all the way down to 36% dodge chance. With this, you land over 100%, so you're essentially immune to melee attacks. Substance Impervious is more straightforward. The subject is immune to all addictions and has zero risk of any overdoses, regardless of how much they snort, inject or smoke. And yes, you're even immune to Luciferium addictions with this. You can use it like a seasoning salt. Enormous subjects are immediately apparent, given that they're an absolute unit. This trait reads like it should have a damage multiplier in melee, but in practice you won't be seeing it. They're more able to shrug off most blows. Because of their massive size, every body part has a significantly higher health total, allowing them to tank huge hits and just keep fighting. As well as that, they're hard to stagger and give a huge amount of meat and leather if butchered. The downside to this is they're slower, they struggle to dodge, they eat considerably more than a normal colonist would, and due to their size, they're going to be an easier target for a ranged enemy to hit too. They'll have a really easy time holding a position down against any melee targets though, because they're basically a wall of solid meat. Bulwark is another tanky gene that you can grab. Working just like the Tough gene, this reduces incoming damage to half. It can't pair with a Robust gene as it's going to override it. However, it can pair with the actual trait for Tough, which allows a colonist to lower incoming damage to just 25%. This also provides the secondary effect of lowering pain experience to just 10%, so small accumulated wounds aren't going to drop a colonist with this because of pain shock either. they're just going to stand and take it. Passive meditation is a gene that you will only have present if you're running royalty. This basically removes the need for meditation on a colonist by recharging 1% of their psi focus every hour, rather than having it passively drain. Of course, if you're repeatedly burning very expensive psycasts, there will still be a use case for a meditation spot, but for occasional uses, this makes them totally free, without taking any time out of your psycaster's day to need to refocus their energy. Serene is a gene that has all of the upsides of Dead Calm, with even more to boot. This removes the risk of social fights, prison breaks, as well as it making them perfectly safe to arrest. Oh, and it casually stops them having any mental breaks at all. Full stop. Not just no violent mental breaks, no mental breaks, period. Levitation is kind of a sleeper hit. It removes all pathing costs, meaning that traversing water, mud, swamps and the like no longer slows a colonist down, which in most cases means that that colonist is near impossible to catch by someone of equal or even slightly faster speed, thanks to all of the terrain debuffs that are happening in Rimworld. They'll never be harmed by dangerous terrain as well, and they can even use an ability to jump a medium distance, ideal for breaking enemies targeting on them. Whilst it's quite a slow jump in terms of its traversal speed, it packs an incredibly quick cooldown, so you can hippity hoppity all the way to the shoppity. Genius is a really straightforward gene that makes it incredibly easy to stack skills on any colonist. This raises growth point gain by 300%, global learning by 200%, which results in double passions having 450% learning rate, standard passions being 300%, and even a normal skill landing at 105. As well as all of that skill gain, this also totally nullifies any experience decay, so once you hit the cap for a skill, it ain't going anywhere. To top it off, the hacking boost of 1000% basically makes any hacking job instantaneous. Plasteel skin will grant a 35% blunt, 50% sharp and 160% heat armor across the entire body. It's exceptionally powerful as these values are also applying to things like the eyes, fingers and toes, places that are usually really difficult to stack armor. So with just a little bit of leather or devil strand, a colonist with this gene will still be able to shrug off the majority of melee attacks as well as small arms fire. Just remember that vanilla combat still relies heavily on RNG, so an enemy somehow landing a nat 20 even with a disadvantaged roll is still possible, and just as infuriating as always. Perfect Vision combines a few different effects into one single gene. This boosts both long and medium accuracy whilst also increasing weapon range. And just like being able to lower aiming time or a ranged cooldown, increasing things like weapon range can usually lead to all kinds of nonsense shenanigans. It's an incredibly useful stat to be able to impact. Finally, colonists with Perfect Vision have all the perks of Dark Vision, so no mood or work speed debuff for any lack of light in the local area. If you wanted an alternative for Perfect Vision, you could try Marksman. This is one of the few genes that can't pair with something else, and it cannot be used alongside Perfect Vision, despite neither of them having any overlap on the impacted stats. Marksman is going to lower ranged cooldown to 75% and boost accuracy by 100. For some frame of reference as to how much that raw value is actually doing, the Careful Shooter trait adds +5. Just remember that certain weapons like the minigun do still have missed shots essentially baked into the weapon. This won't make it a laser beam. And oddly, while the workshop page mentions this also lowers aiming time, in-game that effect seems to be missing currently. Woundless is absolutely disgusting on your melee tank, with it increasing natural healing factor by 800% and tending all bleeding wounds every 6 seconds. Around a very similar quality as using industrial medicine. If you can get this on a colonist that also has something like Bulwark or Enormous, they become nearly impossible to drop. Just be aware that this is the best version of the wound healing gene, so it can't stack with something else like super fast, and super clotting is going to be meaningless because the tend effect that comes from Woundless is better. Blur Runner is there for your speedsters. This adds a flat +1 to move speed, and then it boosts the total speed by an extra 20%. It makes the colonist immune to hitting any traps, and it even reduces the chance that ranged attacks will hit them, granting them a 25% evasion. I could also be wrong, but I think this is the first mod I've seen include a ranged dodge stat from the VE team. It'd be interesting to see more gear or xenotypes incorporate something like this in the future. Herculean is your melee damage gene, which can work alongside Enormous, Plasteel Skin, Woundless, Blur Runner, and Bulwark without any issue, making melee fighters absolutely disgusting if you spend the time and effort to get those best genes on them. This increases melee damage, mass capacity, and carry capacity by 300%, as well as making them totally immune to stagger, so they're never going to struggle getting into melee either. The difference between that mass and carry capacity, for those of you that are curious, is one of those stats is used off map and the other is used on map. Basically, it determines how much a colonist can carry in a caravan versus how heavy of a stack they can pick up when doing a hauling job. Matter phasing is the only other gene with a conflict in this mod, and it can't be paired with levitation. Presumably floating through walls made all kinds of issues. This ability allows the user to effortlessly pass through walls when it's active. Matter phasing makes it exceptionally easy to explore a complex and even scan through mountains for resource veins, provided that you can path to the other side of the solid matter. You need an open tile to set as a destination. You can't force movement into a mountainside or a solid wall. So whilst it makes it easy to run away in an underground complex, it's not necessarily great at looking into them. It's often more beneficial when used to scroll through a structure on the overworld or in orbit. Electromagnetized makes for a rather shocking colonist, as well as granting total immunity to the condition brain shock, meaning they can use implants without EMP dropping them into a coma. This also allows them to use an ability with a 12-hour cooldown that varies slightly based on where you activate it. If you use it indoors, it releases a simple EMP shockwave that's going to disable things like shields and mechanoids for a considerable amount of time, with larger mechs typically shrugging it off faster than a smaller threat could. If, however, you use this outside, it also triggers a localized lightning storm around the colonist, with the strikes themselves not really giving much of a shit about who or what they injure, so probably not the best idea to use this in the middle of your melee group. Self-repairing tissue is not to be confused with the ones you kept in your room as a teenager. Those were self-standing tissues. This works differently to Scarless, as an entire limb needs to be missing for this effect to start working its magic, regrowing organs or an entire leg if needed. If you have a colonist with a pretty grim scar in their eye, remember that you can always use a medical procedure to remove the damaged part, which in turn allows this gene to kick in. Just don't get too heavy-handed with the scalpel, as this process does take a fair amount of time to reach completion. Invisibility grants a skill of the same name. Whilst it has an incredibly short cooldown, the duration seems to be about half of the time needed for the ability to recharge, meaning you can't keep this up indefinitely and will need to use it in well-timed bursts. Attacking out from this invisibility won't break it either, allowing you to easily sneak a colonist into range to use something devastating like a rocket launcher with very little risk. Maybe get a little bit of practice in with the timing though before you try it out in a live fire situation. It finishes a lot faster than you would think. Just like your Hellsphere Blast summons energy directly from the Hellsphere dimension to fire out of your colonist's eyes and ruin whatever it's aimed at. This type of blast is basically what a War Queen uses, only this thing fires in a much faster window. So if you see an ancient enemy with this ability, you want to drop them fast. The range is pretty reasonable and it does enough damage to murder essentially anything unlucky enough that stands in its AoE. Inferno Spew is a turbocharged Impid Flame Breath attack. It hits with greater range, it has a far shorter cooldown, and it deals impressive damage when it does actually hit a target rather than just spewing over the ground. The short cooldown makes it exceptionally powerful for creating a burn box or superheating dangerous buildings if you'd rather not take them head on. It also makes it exceptionally dangerous to build anything in your base out of wood. And the last ability we've got here is Plasteel Claws. This makes for brutal unarmed attacks. They deal 20 damage on a 1.8 second cooldown and have 36% armor penetration. For comparison, that's outclassing a normal steel longsword, and whilst it does lower damage, it's hitting faster with greater penetration. If you manage to land this on someone that's already packing melee traits like Brawler or has the other melee Archite Genes, expect it to go hard in fights. Oh, it's also going to make social fights utterly disastrous for the opponent if you're not careful too. Even a single blow can potentially end someone. Now, that isn't all of the genes. We also have Masterful genes here too. You get one of these for every skill and all of them have the same baseline, plus 16 and an added Burning Passion. This gene isn't going to be able to fix or override inabilities towards a certain skill though. So if a backstory prevents your colonist from performing social tasks, getting Masterful Social on them isn't going to remedy it. Going down the skill list, melee is going to make attacks prioritise hitting the brain or heart, which makes taking prisoners exceptionally difficult. Shooting does a similar thing, only they aim for the head overall rather than the brain or heart, so you may still get a prisoner from time to time. Construction grants a chance to return 20% of the resources you spent when building something. It triggers around 50% of the time. It makes large projects like grav ships super cost efficient. For mining, you get an additional 25% yield, and it also removes the hard cap for mining yield itself, meaning you can go well above and beyond what's intended. Just make sure you consider this when you grab things like jade or gold, as they can make your wealth jump fast. Cooking is really straightforward. It doubles the cooking speed and it increases the yield from butchering creatures. It also removes the hard cap on butchery like mining did for its yield. With plants, same story again. 30% additional yield when harvesting and 0 cap on that colonist yield. You might want to make sure that you're using another mod like Work tab to ensure that the colonists with these genes are the only ones assigned on those uncapped tasks, due to how many additional resources they could be generating. Animals is an interesting one, with it granting a unique type of recreation to the colonist of animal relaxation. Anytime they interact with an animal, such as training or shearing them, it gives them a little bit of recreation, keeping them happy thanks to a high recreation need and burning passion for their work all day. Crafting can be exceptionally strong, with it granting a bonus level of quality to anything that's being created and a 25% additional yield from mechanoid shredding. You can easily pair this with something like a production specialist role to turn any excellent item into instant legendary works. Just be aware of the pop-up spam you're going to get every time they hop on your tailoring bench. Art has a slightly more conditional bonus, as it doesn't get a flat boost to quality like crafting did, with it instead refunding 20% of the resources if the work happens to be masterwork or legendary. It's fantastic if you're making sculptures out of jade, for example, but it might be overkill if you're using simple stone. Medical is crazy strong, potentially one of the best, giving you a very good reason to have a dedicated doctor that handles all treatments. This completely prevents surgery from failing, removing that normally unavoidable 2% failure chance. Not only that, it stops medicine from being consumed when you use it to tend someone. That means you can use Glitter World on basically everything with that doctor, resulting in rapid recoveries and near immunity from all but the most severe of illnesses. Social is another skill that gets a really unique interaction, granting the colonist a 20% chance with every prisoner interaction to remove an unwaveringly loyal tag. So yep, all of those raiders that inevitably fall down because they have the loyal tag and ridiculously good stats and traits can now be brought over to your side, given a little bit of time anyway. If you're using ideology, this is also going to boost the conversion power by 100%, which can stack beautifully with the moral guide role. Finally, for intellectual, it grants a solid amount of passive research every day, 50 points to your chosen project per hour. That alone makes the entire tech tree a breeze, as you could unlock something like Cataphract armor in just 5 days without actually having anyone touch a research bench. So that's what we've got to play with gene-wise. What about the new enemies that are included in Ancients? You've got 4 variants of a spliced monstrosity. Currently, you're only going to encounter these in the labs, although I'm sure at some point a modder's going to try and put these enemies into something similar to a Gorehulk assault so that you can face them at your normal base. The Splicetoot is a little failed experiment, designed to behave like a particularly grim stink bomb. They shuffle their way towards your colonists with the intention of being killed, so that they can explode in a cloud of rot stink, causing debuffs and infecting your lungs. They're easy to deal with, but potentially annoying if they go off in a confined space, whilst other monstrosities are blocking the exit. A Spliceling is the most humanoid of these monstrosities in terms of its scale, but it's beyond saving, so putting it down is a mercy. It has a small area damage skill that splashes any targets caught within with acid, resulting in rapid build-up of extremely painful burn wounds that are also an infection risk nightmare. It has enough range on this spit ability that keeping it at arm's length is also tough. Because of the tight corridors you'll be fighting it in and a lack of wind-up for that acid attack, by the time you hear it charging it, it's pretty much too late. The Splicehulk is your chonky boy. These are able to tank an incredible amount of damage, with it passively healing bleeding wounds and crushing any structures that it happens to pass near or over. Splicehulks need concentrated ranged fire to bring them down, and you want to ensure that they aren't travelling over any buildings that you intend to take home. So if you can restrict them to a straight corridor funnel, it'll lead to a better outcome. Also, given this bleed out immunity they have, with it constantly closing their wounds, you want to continue to mag dump into their body once they've collapsed from pain, to make sure that they're finished for good. Finally, you have the Splice Fiend. This has the highest agility, the most damage, and the beefiest durability of all monstrosities. It's a legitimate threat, even to a well-equipped team. Due to its pain immunity, the only way you're bringing this thing down is by killing it, but you can make it easier on yourself by utilising a little bit of fire. Monstrosities do burn well, and it prevents them from hammering on your front line. You just need to be a little bit careful about turning the bunker into an oven. So consider bringing a Xenotype that has fire spits, equipping a Molotov, or using something like a Hellcat rifle when taking down an ancient lab. Having a Splice Fiend running around on fire gives you ample time to pull the trigger on your chain shotguns to let them do their work and bring it down for good. In terms of what these monstrosities are guarding, there's a good chunk of new structures, and that's not just counting the lab equipment. You're also going to be getting a new piece of clothing and a weapon to boot. The patient gown is usually found in dedicated crates that spew out loads of these things. Whilst they're pretty pants in terms of their clothing stats, what you're actually going to be wearing these for are the hidden offsets, with a gown increasing the success chance of an Archogen injection by 2, and it improves the surgery success chance on the wearer by 10%. Having a handful of these in your hospital or Archite lab is pretty handy to lean the odds in your favour. The scalpel is, at least I think, the first weapon I've seen in the game that features scaling based off a skill other than melee. It has a very low sharp damage as its baseline, but it gains an additional point of damage per skill level that the wielder has in medical, showcasing their aptitude with a precision melee tool. Whilst this isn't likely to blow other melee weapons out of the water, a brawling doctor can make absolutely disgusting use of something like this, before they get their hands on a monosword or a Zeus hammer anyway. I briefly mentioned finding patient gowns in crates then. The labs are going to have parts that you're familiar with from the original Ancients and a few new bits to dig into as well. We're not going to go over absolutely everything, as there's a considerable amount of cosmetic parts and set deck. So let's go over the important things. You have your usual shelves, crates and boxes to open, with many of them holding staple resources like medicine, food, neutro, as well as dedicated crates for gene packs and containment units for Archite capsules. One part to keep your eye open for are organ boxes. These can hold things like architect limbs or bionic enhancements, as well as even silent neuroformers. Some of these more lucrative boxes are going to require a little bit of hacking to open, so it isn't quite as simple as dragging an open order across the complex and calling the job done. You'll find that pipeline junctions can be tapped for chem fuel without any risk of infestation like in the older version, and you might also find laboratory caskets too, which will contain successful test subjects that you can arrest and recruit for yourself. Just be aware that all of these candidates will have been through 2 standard rounds of successful injections, which results in 2 Archite genes and 2 negatives to balance it back out. Of course, it's not all storage and containers, you have some really funky stuff to mess around with in the vaults too. The ancient green beds and sun lamps are smaller versions of the ones that you can construct, allowing for a more confined build and better tetrasability with the green beds too. So whilst you're going to have to raid multiple vaults to get your hand on a complete setup, you will be able to use every single tile inside of a sun lamp radius compared to the scuffed build that you normally have to do. You'll also have access to the ancient workshop and the cooking station, both of which can be uninstalled and taken home with you. The workshop combines 3 benches into one, granting you access to smithing, machining and smelting jobs in a single structure, which allows for an incredibly small and efficient workshop. The cooking station incorporates a butcher table with 0 negative impact on cleanliness, so if you're not a fan of putting a standard butcher table inside your freezer or airlock, now you've got an option that doesn't result in food poisoning. To power all of this stuff, you've got a couple of options. The ancient chem fuel generator has a variable power output, with it claiming it has a baseline of around 2000 watts on the info panel. Every so often this is going to stall and it will require a kick or 4 to get it started again. Each time the generator's kicked, it takes a little bit of damage and it totally randomizes its power output. So you might need to act like it owes you money and kick the living shit out of it until you get the power amount that you're happy with. For something more reliable, that also runs on a timer, you have the bio battery. This will output a steady but varied amount of power based on the body size of the creature that you have put within it, with it burning around 1 kilogram of mass every hour. You need to bear in mind that whilst placing something like a thrombo in the machine would generate a tremendous amount of power for a long time, it also removes the opportunity to butcher it for its hide, horn and meat. So your most likely targets are going to be enemy raiders that you don't really care about. Then comes the other downside. Targets for this bio battery need to be alive when you throw them in. It can't process corpses, making it a pretty space heavy power solution that doesn't really output a great deal, and it needs refilling with fresh victims constantly. Fortunately, we've still got some good parts left, as you're also likely to find a foosball table in the ancient vaults, which provides a great source of recreation. Vaults also feature one of, if not my most favourite structure ever, the pneumatic launch port. This used to be the cargo catapult in the older version of Ancients, with it acting as an on-demand loot box basically. You load whatever crap you don't want into this thing and fling it away. A few days later you get sent something of a similar-ish value in return. I love this thing. It's the most stupid gambling mechanic ever with essentially no downside. If the reward you get back is useless, it goes straight back in the tube and thump, you try again. If your base gets a little bit heavy on leather, meat or stone blocks, into the tube they go and thump, maybe it comes back as something you actually want, like a skill trainer or a case of beer. Just be aware that someone is receiving this stuff that you fling away, and most dick moves have been taken into consideration by the team, so don't expect to be thanked for your contribution of toxic waste or a bundle of corpses. Tainted clothes and bio-coded weapons, however, that's totally fair game. The other parts to mention in the ancient facilities are hospital chairs, beds and benches. These are exceptionally good to deconstruct, as they're made with steel and synthread, giving you a really good source of what's normally an exceptionally rare resource in the game. I scrapped all of the chairs and beds in a large bunker and it resulted in almost 1,500 synthread alone. That's a whole lot of shirts, pants and dusters. You'll also find creepy looking ancient toy boxes and baby toys that work just like normal ones, only they kinda look cursed, and as cute as the nursery floor is, you can never fix it up or clean it. I'd use that texture in every colony if it wasn't trashed. Whilst there is somewhat of a defensive measure in the deeper vaults in the form of an air purifier, it doesn't raise the temperature meaningfully enough to actually pose much of a risk to you, especially when compared to some of the threats from previous quest mods. You're fairly safe to ignore it and just explore through a sweaty room as long as you're not going to be hanging around too long. The final building of note here is something that you can't uninstall and take home with you. It's an ancient Wonderdoc. These things are always going to start with a low-ish chance to malfunction that gets progressively higher every time you successfully perform a procedure with it. If the machine breaks during a cycle, it has a different negative effect depending on which of the 4 modes you were using, but it's always going to prevent it from being used anymore, and there's no option to repair these either, they're just straight up busted. So always consider after clearing the lab if it's worthwhile to safely bring weaker or frail colonists to the Wonderdoc with the intention of trying to fix them up. After all, you want to get the most of its low risk use before you move on. The bioregeneration cycle is like an accelerated biosculpting pod, with it only taking 6 hours to complete, and it heals any existing wounds as well as restoring missing limbs, rather than just fixing things like missing digits or scars. If this procedure malfunctions, it is going to mangle a few of the colonists' limbs as well as filling their system with a random illness. It could even potentially give them a carcinoma. Be a little bit careful about putting someone into this if they already have particularly nasty wounds on their body. That malfunction might just be enough to kill them if the damage lands on their head or torso. The insta-rehab cycle can cure any and all addictions, including a Luciferium dependency. If, for example, you put a waster into this cycle to remove their psychite dependency, which is genetic, the Wonderdoc will get rid of the gene that's causing that dependency too. Just be aware that that in and of itself can cause problems, as wasters being immune to the downsides of huffing vast amounts of psychite is what makes them effective. Getting rid of that gene will also make them require more nutrition, as it was offsetting their metabolic efficiency. If this procedure malfunctions, it's instead going to install a random gene with a drug dependency, which isn't bad for things like alcohol or wake up, but landing on smoke leaf is really grim. A time reversal cycle is super straightforward. It intends to de-age the target by 10 years, potentially helping your geriatric colonists back on their feet by removing an age-related malady. If this procedure goes sideways, it's either hilarious or terrible, as it will turn the target into a toddler or an elder. Having them turn into a toddler isn't honestly the worst thing, as provided that you have growth fats researched, you can throw them in, get them back up to 18 again, and they've still got all of their experience and traits, just in a brand new body. Finally, the skill reformatting cycle is a pretty situational one. This attempts to redistribute all the skill levels of the colonist more evenly across every work type, which allows you to level up quickly with a burning passion before dumping the gained experience into things that would normally take an age to learn. Personally, the way I play, I tend to keep people working on the stuff that they're passionate about, so redistributing points into things they're not interested in isn't super useful for me, but I'm sure there's others that are really going to dig this. If the machine malfunctions during this procedure, rather than evenly spreading that experience, it's going to scatter it at complete random, which could end really well by pumping the stat that you wanted to increase by the most possible, or it could ignore that stat entirely and actually lower it from what you'd started with. All we got left to talk about then are the 2 scenarios and the new unique character. The new vault scenario is going to allow you to pick an on-planet location to place your new vault, as well as pick whatever ideology you would like. Your starting colonist is going to be a test subject, meaning they have 2 positive Archite genes and 2 negative offsets. It's likely to be a very reroll heavy start to get a good combo of traits, skills, and genes here. You're going to start in a sealed vault, which is an incredibly strong position thanks to the indestructible walls. You're going to have overhead mountains for ceiling and a single sealed door that leads to your base. As long as you don't open that door to the outside world, you're safe from any exterior threats for a very long time. So it's up to you if you want to build in and repurpose this base, making it a forever home, or if you want to move away from it once you're done exploring and looting it a little bit more thoroughly. You can go down to the lower level of this vault in this scenario as well. It grants you multiple spaces to build and work within, as well as immediate access to a small setup of Archite injection machinery. Just be aware that only the upper floor of your base starts safe. There are still sealed containment vaults waiting to burst open in the basement, so don't rush down there immediately unless you started with some particularly nasty combat related genes. Because of the nature of what you're starting with as well, you're going to be in quite a wealthy colony compared to most other scenarios, so having colonists that can defend themselves against particularly nasty threats is advisable. You're going to have to open that main door at some point after all, which is then going to give enemies an avenue to attack you. Whilst you did get to pick your starting colonists for this scenario, the others that you're going to find in sealed caskets are a little bit more random, with these additional colonists helping to make up your starting group. Not only that, you're going to find a unique casket present in your vault that contains the character for the quest mod, known as the Experiment. This character has the trait of being a perfect candidate and comes in with 3 Archite Genes and no downsides. That trait will allow them to always succeed when being injected with new Archites. However, it comes at a pretty heavy cost of something known as Hemocollapse Syndrome. This disease is terminal, but it's not incurable. To reach its full effect, it's going to take a couple of years, with successful 10s extending the timer to a maximum of 4. It's likely that it's already going to be starting higher than 0% though, so you've probably lost a little bit of time from the get-go. This progresses through a few stages. It starts at latent, which lowers movement speed and consciousness, as well as slightly slowing immunity gain speed. Once this syndrome advances above 25%, it becomes progressive. It dyes its hair a vibrant colour and it goes and earns an art degree. The movement and consciousness doubled, and that immunity gain speed gets even worse, as well as the syndrome now causing a small amount of pain. It's a while before it's going to get any worse than that though, with the next breakpoint being 55%, which will turn it into advanced. This causes more pain, movement loss, consciousness loss, and it halves immunity gain speed. It's getting pretty grim indeed. The next stage is quite a ways off though, at 90%. But it's called terminal. This causes a slow constant bleed of 6% per day that cannot be staunched by tending it. Pain is much higher, movement lower by 30, consciousness dropped by 40, and immunity gain is gone. Once this condition hits 100%, it's death. As for curing the problem, it's not classed as an illness, so something like perfect immunity doesn't help with it, and deathless just results in the experiment being trapped in a regeneration coma loop if the syndrome is allowed to hit 100%. So what you either need is a healer mech serum that can remove it entirely, or you want to purposefully let them perish to bring them back with a resurrection serum, or similar effect, as when they come back, they won't have the syndrome anymore and can go about their life as normal. The Wonderdoc doesn't appear to be able to fix this condition either, with a successful regeneration cycle fixing everything but hemocollapse. The second scenario allows you to futz around with the pneumatic tube on your home map without needing to commit to playing around a whole vault or using Archite Genes, giving you what boils down to a tribal star that worships the tube god. This location isn't anywhere near as rich as a normal vault, nor does it have overhead mounting protection as standard, and the exterior of the structure is only steel walls, so you're not as bulletproof as in that other scenario. However, you get to lead this tribe in any direction you fancy whilst gambling on the tube network at your leisure, making for a nice chilled start that can add a little bit of spice every so often. Just be aware that whilst you can get rid of most of the external doors, the trash and the extra structures, all of the tube parts and the floor beneath them isn't going anywhere, so quite a large chunk of your map is going to be taken by this setup. It's easy enough to build around it and incorporate it into your colony, but if you've got, shall we say, a certain mentality about how your base needs to look, this may drive you insane, because you can't even clear this stuff with dev mode. And there we have it, the new improved Ancients mod. Now more sensical as a quest rather than trying to shoehorn everything into a faction, it's missing some of the bits from the previous version of the mod, namely the severe downsides to taking Archite injections, as you only receive minor negative genes that can be entirely circumvented now, rather than the potentially crippling downsides that we had before. You're also not getting a storyteller, the mending bench or the isolationist meme from this anymore. Seems that no one's bothered about the loss of that storyteller, with currently no mention of it in the workshop comments. The mending bench has been replaced by the repair shelves that you can get from Vanilla Furniture Expanded Spacer, and the Isolationist meme is now folded into Vanilla Ideology Expanded memes and structures. It's nice to have a new quest chain to explore that really makes good use of things like shuttles and grav ships as well, because ferrying that stuff back from the vault is hard going. It's heavy and there can be a lot of it. Even better is that stuff isn't restricted from being placed inside your grav ship. So if you wanted to make your own floating super soldier craft, breezing around the world to scoop up parts that you're missing, you can do that. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm off to enjoy the festive holidays. I don't normally date my videos by putting quite such a specific message in the outro for them, but I hope wherever you are, you have health, happiness, good company, warm food, and cold drinks this season. If you don't have all of those things, that's fine. Just remember to cherish the things that you do have. I'm going to be back next year with a playthrough series that got beautifully shunted down my workflow list with the release of both Gravship and Ancients. Overall, it's been a good year for the channel though. I'd be lying if I said there weren't struggles, of course, namely within my own headspace, because so much content these days is absolute AI slop. It's hard to be motivated to keep creating original work, writing scripts, recording voiceover, spending hours recording and editing video, all of it, when I see so many others pasting a Wikipedia page into ChatGPT, asking for a summary, getting an AI voice to do it, and then pasting the whole thing on top of a random collection of vaguely related images. And they get views for it. So if you can do one thing for me this year, help the human creators that you follow. Anyone with a vision that they're spending time and energy pouring themselves into. Writers, musicians, filmmakers, critics, analysts, whatever they do. If you appreciate the efforts that they are going to, let them know. Leave them a comment, a review, share their work, like their video, encourage them to keep doing what they're doing. Because this creative process can be a draining one, and the tidal wave of AI that a lot of people are facing down right now is especially demotivating. And it's only getting more prominent in spaces like this. A huge thank you to those of you who have kept me going through it all. It's an interesting time. If you'd like to see what I'm working on and get insights into any upcoming projects, it's all available on my Patreon page. All the posts there are free to read, but if you'd like, you can support me in producing content like this for just £1 a month. It gets your name in the credits of these videos and it does help me to stay alive. Wherever you are in the world, enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening. Take care.
You always got my back, and of course I got your back, don't you